Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video on Lumber Capital Log Yard. Today I'm going to be giving a few tips on how you can get a perfectly squared cant. And as most players know, this is not as easy as it sounds. So let's get into this video. So when you're plane sawing, you usually square up your log first and then plane saw down. And so it's really important that when you are doing the squaring up process that your cant actually ends up squared. Now if it doesn't and it's just a little off, it doesn't actually show up that much in your lumber. Obviously, anybody who knows would be able to see that it's not, but it's not as bad when you're just making 1-inch pieces out of it. But if you are in the business of selling beams, you know that it's really important for your beams to be squared. And I've had some trouble with it, and I know it's something that other people deal with when you have this kind of mill because of over-rotation issues and all kinds of stuff that I'm going to be getting into here in a minute. So let's go ahead and jump into rolling on this log and cutting it. Let's go. So the first cut is not really relevant to the squaring up process, so I'm going to just go ahead and make that first cut quick, and then I'll dive into the actual process here, because the next step after this is very important. These are what I refer to as the dogs. You hear me refer to them a lot, and this is what I'm talking about. They're the little arms that go up and down, and they prevent the log from rolling off the mill this way, but they also act as a square to help square up your cant. The issue that might arise when trying to use your dogs as your method of squaring up your cant is that it's hard to get the flat side of your log flush with the dogs perfectly. And if it's just a little off, your cant's not going to be squared, and it's noticeable. So I took off the first slab, I also took off a flitch, and now we're ready to rotate the log. Now before I learned better, I used to make the first rotation at 90 degrees so that the flat side of your log was flush with the dogs. And then I learned when we got the LT40 that it was better to rotate it the first time 180 degrees and make your second cut on the opposite side, because that way the bed of your mill is level with your saw blade, and you're going to end up with a lot more square of a cant that way. So that's my first tip. If you've been rotating at 90 degrees, rotate it at 180 the first time. It changes up a little bit how you'd normally do it, but it's really easy to catch on, and it's a lot better way. So let's go ahead and turn this log. All right, so now I'm just going to make my first cut at whatever I want my width to be. So probably, I don't know if I can get a 12 out of this log. That would be nice. I'm gonna cut it at 12 anyhow. It might end up being a 10 though. Now that I've made my second cut, and I also made a flitch as well, again, I'm going to turn this log at 90 degrees. And so now we are faced with the same issue that we would have been faced if we had turned it 90 degrees the first time, is that we have to make sure that the flat side of this log is nice and flush with the dogs. Now, the one pro about turning it 180 degrees the first time is that now when I'm going to turn it 90 degrees, this dog, or this little foot, whatever you want to call it, is going to have a flat side to be flush up against, which it wouldn't if you had turned it 90 degrees the first cut. All right, let's go ahead and turn this log and we'll see how flush we can get it here. This log is kind of, you know, on the larger side and nice and straight, so a lot of the hard issues, or a lot of the struggle that you might have to get it nice and squared usually happens with smaller logs, because your dogs can't be straight all the way up, and it's really important that they are. So let's go ahead and turn it here. We have to make sure that we don't over rotate here. Now, we do not want to over rotate. That's over rotated right there. Do you see what I did? That is going to make it not square. So I did this just as an example. This is kind of overly dramatic of what it would be. Usually you'd spot that because that's kind of quite a gap there, but just even if it was a little less than that, it'd still be noticeable. So in the event of over rotating it, you can use your dogs to sometimes shift it back the other direction, but sometimes you have to actually turn it all the way back around to get it right, but we'll see what we can do about this. So that was pretty easy to just adjust and get back into place. And as you can see here though, if you actually still look closely, you can see that it is not flush with the dogs yet. You can actually still see a tiny gap, and this is more what it would be like, and that is really hard to notice. Like, I cannot see that from over there, and it literally took me walking over here and looking at it to see that indeed that is not flush with the dog. So let me just do a little quick adjusting and I'll be right back. So now that is nice and flush. That is as close as you can get, and it's really easy to do it with a log that's large enough. But imagine if the log was small enough that you couldn't have your dogs all the way straight up, because you can't, otherwise you'll run your sawmill right into them. That can happen. There's no safety installed in that to prevent that from happening, so you really have to watch your dogs, and that's why if your log's smaller, you might not be able to have them all the way up, and so it gets really challenging to see if your log's going to be squared. So that might be another thing to watch out for if you are trying to mill a beam that is on the larger side and it needs to be squared. Maybe choose a larger log, don't go with a smaller log. And we do cut a lot of 6x6s out of smaller logs because it's easier and a good use of top wood. But if you want them to be super ultra squared, it's a lot easier to do it with a larger log. So now it's time to take off our third slab, and at this point most of the hard work of squaring up your log is done. Now I'm going to make it a cant and we'll use a tool to see just how square it is. All right, now it's time for the true test. Let's just see if it's square or not. Now that looks square with this. That is, I mean, that's pretty square. I want to try it with this one because I thought that maybe this one would be a better way of seeing. No. Now there is, I mean, it's not perfect. As you can see, if that is flush, there is a tiny gap. Can you see that? It is very slight, but it's not perfectly squared. And that is just the joys of rough cut lumber right there. It's hard to get it perfect, but I mean, with this square, you can't really even tell. Just depends on the tool you use, I guess, because that feels square. Maybe this one's warped even, could be. And now a quick word from the boss about some exciting new content.
Hey everybody, I got in trouble with my wife the other day. She said, Ken, all you do is work and you have to have a hobby and you don't have one. So we are gonna start a additional barbecuing segment, and it's gonna be about live fire cooking on the channel, and that is gonna be my hobby. So we have a smoker grill, we have a Santa Maria grill and a pizza oven, and we have that all set up in our outdoor kitchen. And we are going to add this segment starting in 2 or 3 weeks, and it will be barbecue season. So we have our hickory rack, we have hickory cookwood, we have hickory chips. We're going to have that in other materials too, cherry and hard maple and oak. And so that's what we're going to be doing, and it's going to be a hobby. I haven't had one for a long time.